Thanks.
Yeah. So we are recording now, and I am going to start us with a conversation that we just left off before we turned the cameras on and the mics on. Like, seriously. So we're in New Haven right now.
Yes.
But how good of a hamburger is Rudy's?
And I will just reiterate for the good people here, is that I have not had a good burger in so long.
Yeah.
And that was perfect in every way. And sometimes it's also just it's the patty, which makes a difference. Is it cooked well? Are the toppings selected cook well? I normally don't go for pickles on my burger, but that was delightful.
Yeah.
And then the sauce was great. I've never had a burger from Rudy's until today, and I've been living here part of 6 years. So I'm just like, I think the last time I was at Rudy's was literally for I think I grabbed a beer with some friends at the end of my first year.
Sure.
But never had the food, so I feel greatly blessed, and it is a nice change of pace from my normal takeout options.
What is the normal takeout regimen?
Oh God!
Is it what is your title now? Because you keep getting adjectives added to it.
Yes. So it is the full title is
please.
Liturgical Minister and a Chapel Communications Manager of Marquand Chapel at Yale Divinity School. So that is all that is. We can unpack that at some point, but that's really the official title.
Yeah.
I am a sucker for chicken nuggets. That's my vice. So garden catering tends to be my go-to. A good my mother is watching this. But a 3/4 pound bag of seasoned nuggets and fries.
Perfect.
Or it'll be, and this is where I know I've ordered from here too much, because these are both the places where I'm now considered a loyal customer.
Okay.
Is Haven Hot Chicken, and sometimes it's great, but sometimes what they'll do, and more often than they should, is they do a buy one get one free. So I'm all right, guess I'm dropping money for this right now, and now I have dinner tonight and dinner tomorrow. And I justify it being it's not a burger, so it's chicken, which is better, but that tends to be my go-to.
So my question is, which patristics exam did you put off, and are you cramming for now?
Thankfully none, and I'm grateful that I don't have any of that on my plate anymore.
Yeah. As someone who also did not do well in patristics, I'm sorry, Christopher Bailey.
Oh God!
I am also very thankful, but I'm sure you're doing fine down at Duke University or wherever you are.
I think he's in Texas now.
Are you in Texas, Christopher Bailey? I hope that you're well. But one of the I imagine it's nice to not have the pressures of being a student, but I imagine there are probably other pressures that replace that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I graduated in 2020 from IDS at the very beginnings of the pandemic, and I came back here after working in DC in fall 2021, and a couple of things, right? So my first day here, I walk into the chapel, and it feels like you're walking into a time machine, and there's stuff that still remained there from when I was a student. So for me, I think a lot of the pressures were having to redefine myself as no longer a student in this space, as somebody who occupied an important role, and one that is very outward facing.
Yeah.
And so all of the kind of formational pieces of being here as a student are now, for better or worse, are here to play, right? And so you have to sort of model that for students, and you have to model that for students who have some inkling of what it was like to be here, students who are coming into this very green and having very little institutional memory, and so having to model like what somebody who has been to divinity school looks like, but then all these other complicated questions of, okay, like, I'm an unordained lay Catholic person who is now helping run an ecumenical chapel that's largely mainline Protestant. So how does that get folded into the expectations that either I have for myself, but also the expectations that folks from various communities may map onto me, as also somebody of color. So all of those things, right? All of those things start to collapse into this one body that is present in this space 5 days a week, right? And so a lot of it, I think, is really having to untangle what expectations do I hold for myself, and what are the expectations that the ones that folks have of me, or the ones that I am projecting that folks have of me in this space.
We'll come back to projections and all that stuff later. But one of the things that we were talking about on our way over to the conference room where we're taping, I almost said the studio. I mean, because for the next 45, 60 minutes it will be. But you made the acknowledgement that it's kind of like being the associate rector of a parish on a Sunday, but 5 times a week.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. I mean, I think for folks who work in the church or attend any sort of like a religious community that is focused around one day, there's like an implicit knowledge as both a participant and as a leader that it just is work, right? And and you know this from being a student and also a chapel minister that we were doing together. Right. But every day is different, right? And so, like, especially at a place like Marquand Chapel, where you have to balance ecumenical concerns, social concerns, you have to balance who is in the space, who's not in the space. Is our theology sound? And if it's sound, is it correct? Right? Like all of those things I think are on display. You have to be constantly thinking about how that plays out.
And is your theology sound for whom?
Exactly, right, exactly. So who resonates with that? And not everybody is going to resonate with that on a given day of the week. And so you are constantly juggling every day, where every day is a little bit different. Someone may be preaching, someone might be dancing, or there might not be any music at all, or, you know, folks are off of their seats all the time and are asked to be in different places or use their bodies in new ways or not. And so all of those things, I think, are at play, and we are doing this odd thing of creating a laboratory and also doing it in a holy way. And, you know, those two things can rub up against each other more times than none. And that's okay too, you know? I think that is an okay thing to do. But Sunday morning, 5 days a week is the best way that I can explain it. And when I say that, the response is, oh, and then it's followed by an, oh, and then it's like, then it clicks in. I'm like, all right, we're there. We know it. We're there. So, yeah.
So here's the question.
Okay.
I know that a lot of things changed. A lot of the rhythms of life here at YGS changed because of COVID restrictions. One of the most important things, at least to me, when I'm doing Sunday work, is that I am properly caffeinated before, during, and after. Have they, as of yet, restored coffee hour after chapel?
They have not. They have not restored coffee hour, and it's interesting because I think we're into this. I know. Yeah, they have not restored coffee hour, and we've also entered this interesting phase where coffee hour was both a caffeinated moment and a community moment, right? And if something happened in chapel or something happened during the day, there was just a valve for folks to be able to release some pressure, right? Or process it together. And the way that the community is now, because of COVID restrictions, because we've also been in isolation, for a year and a half, 2 years, we have to start over in terms of how we build community together. And so those things that like maybe we took for granted, like coffee hour, don't currently exist in the same way. Sorry, that is a much different answer to your question about being caffeinated, but it is it's when I talk to students about it as a past relic, folks, there's like a desire for or at least like a question of what happened to it and what would it look like to bring folks together again, even for 20 minutes. So that question touches on a lot of things that I think about on a daily basis.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like it's now a socio-liturgical Wild West, because none of the ways that we're used to doing things are permissible under COVID guidelines.
Yes. And just like, now that I feel like we are in this particular part of the pandemic where things have opened up and there's like an eagerness for folks to want to gather together, the temptation is to kind of return to what we've done before. And something I think we have to be wary of is, well, what are certain things we could actually just let die onto themselves? Because
please not coffee.
Please not coffee, not not tea, but maybe like, is putting a pizza in the middle of a conference room and just saying, like, folks, assuming that folks will come, working on assumptions of what was before, I think, is just it's a hard strategy to use, I think, now, because we are starting over, right? And in my mind, we're going to be starting over for the next 3 years, 3, 4, 5 years of building back up these kind of rhythms, and we need to think a little bit differently about what goes into making those rhythms now.
But the piece that I think that I hear is that we need to redefine what things we do to make those rhythms, but the rhythms are still important. The component of building community is still important. I remember this was probably the year, I think this would have been the year before you matriculated, because you got here in 2017, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it would have been. I was here when President Orange 45 got elected, and that was the most well-attended service of chapel of the 3 years that I was here, including Advent services.
Okay. See, that's interesting, right? Because like, I'm gonna try to find a way to find two. It is interesting. I think we are at this like weird point now where I don't know if the same thing would have happened this time around. It's unclear to me who would be in the room if, like, let's say, 45 found his way back in.
Well, in a very specific sense, we're taping in the second week of November. So if, say, for example, a certain celebrity doctor had won the race for congressional senate in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, true, and we're also talking less than 24 hours after that announcement was made to run again at the time of this taping, right? And so
that's right.
It's unclear to me actually who would be in the space of who would be in that space in particular should something monumental like that happen, because I think also even in the chapel we have to be able to establish a direction of what we see the possibilities of church can be, of worship can be, of our faith can be. And so we're at this inflection point of where do we go next, and it's not entirely clear to me, not yet, where where that goes, right? I'm not saying, and I say this also just like I'm a lay Catholic person, right? And at the time of this taping, a new U.S. bishop was just elected, who is really horrible on so many different fronts. But and I see it as like part of a larger trend of we're at a fork in the road, and so I think we need to be doing some real hard interrogating of our identities as they are in institutions and systems of power and belonging. It's a lot of rambling.
No, but I think you found it. It raises it. It's the perennial question, right?
Yeah.
Let's just keep doing it the way we've always done it. But now we're in a place where we are legally obligated by the federal government because of COVID guidelines and the ensuing cultural aftermath to say we can't do it the way that we've always done it.
Yeah, I think actually, honestly, that might just be the kick in the butt that we need, though, right? Because I think, what would it look like if we were to come from a place of transformation where we allowed ourselves to let go of certain things that we know didn't serve us well, but to let go of norms and expectations that we felt indebted to, and to release ourselves from that and to start anew. What would happen if we actually allowed ourselves to do that? And that means too, right? Like having to really allow ourselves to grieve. And we've just like not done that. I remember after Biden was elected, I can't remember if it was before his inauguration or whatnot, he had held a vigil for victims of COVID. And I remember it being like, this is the first time in the last year where we've allowed ourselves to grieve. And I remember crying watching that, because we cannot actually do things unless we allow ourselves to grieve and mourn, and say, yeah, actually we do need to start over, we need to do things differently, or we need to be able to say that we've lost these things, and that's okay to do.
We need to be able to say that something is different, so that we could be, even if this is what we wanted, we could authentically be as close to the same thing as we say that we want to be.
Yes. And isn't that like, there's a beauty in that too, right? And to be as close as we are to it doesn't mean actually doing it, right? It's like within our grasp, but never actually. It's within our grasp, but we never actually get a chance to hold it. For me, there's like a lot of grace in that, because it means that, all right, we're getting pretty close. So whoever comes next or who comes after, they'll get a few inches closer. And so maybe it's our responsibility to push the needle just a little bit further, so that those who come after us can get there, right? And there's a part of me that like wonders if we've lost that sense of continuity, or passing of the torch, so to speak.
The space-time continuum, as it were.
The Jeremy Bearimy, as it is. But yeah, no, I mean, I just like, I do think like getting close to it doesn't necessarily mean like we are going to get there immediately, right? That's why I like resonate so strongly with Moses and the Israelites just going through the desert. Like they didn't know when it was going to end, but they knew what, at least like there was something beyond that they were getting just a little bit closer to, even if they didn't get to see it. Because it was as much about them as it was for everybody else who comes after. So, yeah, it would be nice if we were able to, or at least from what I'm seeing, if like we were more intentional about being able to understand our position in the time-space continuum of this, as you so say.
Well, I remember our former boss and mentor Maggie Don had this chapter of that book that the title was "You Have to Change in Order to Stay the Same."
Ooh.
So thank you, Maggie Don. Please be on the podcast.
Yes, you should be on the podcast. Oh, you have to change in order to stay the same.
Yeah.
Can you expound on that a little bit? I'm curious what the context was.
Yeah. So a lot of this sociological stuff was very important. But we know Maggie, the brilliant priest, musician, mom that she is, that she has a keen eye for liturgy and for integrating lots of different concepts in liturgy, right? It's like, seriously, holy shit. I have never seen a service where they have done pop songs in an Anglo-Catholic liturgy. But they did it, and I was like, damn.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's so... I feel like being in the second year, like last year was so much just trying to figure out how to do this, and in this second year of actually having more time to be a lot more creative about what we're doing and how that plays out in our services, that has been one of the biggest joys of being able to so if we're running like change, so that we have to be able to change so that we can stay the same. It's so much about possibility.
Yeah.
And I remember we very recently had a student who was giving a senior sermon, lay Catholic, and wanted to preach on Song of Solomon.
Lovely.
Or Song of Songs, and talked about what do we do with suffering in the midst of God's silence.
Yeah.
Right? And so he had preached this beautiful sermon, and it was like very, very Catholic, just like in the language,
sure,
and just the way that he had formed it. After that, we had the Yale Black Seminarians Gospel Choir sing "God Is," and I remember just like, we're not sure how this is going to work. I'm like, no, actually, this will work. Trust me, it will make sense. It will make sense, and it will hit where folks need to be.
Yeah.
Where folks need to be met in this, and it was beautiful to bear witness to that.
Yeah.
Too, right, and to bear witness to folks allowing themselves, and also like allowing myself to be opened up to the possibility of change, of what liturgy and what worship can look like. I just like that was incredible. That was a really beautiful moment, and you know, like folks actually are along for the ride too, right? Like,
yes.
And I don't think we should doubt that people will not want to do those things or want to engage. The question I would ask, and this is what I ask my chapel ministers, is like, if we're going to do this, what is the lowest and widest on-ramp that you're creating for people to explore this? If it's too high and if it's too narrow, it's not going to do the thing you want it to do. So, and sometimes that means tempering expectations or changing things up, but if you make it accessible enough and maintain the integrity or the soundness of it, really beautiful things can happen.
The thing that strikes me through all of this is that everything of your experience, I suspect, has been almost, I'd suspect on a daily basis, maybe even a smaller level than that, has been constantly new. like
Mm.
new loosening of COVID, new years of chapel ministers.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I wonder, in all of that newness, are you starting to notice things that feel familiar and feel more or less
Oh, yeah.
alike what they used to when you were a student?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's funny because I think midway through last year, I just remember sitting, or I was like people watching, because sometimes I will just like randomly, look at the refectory at after chapel and see, and there's the familiarity, I think, is outside of like the anxiety of being a grad student, but there's a curiosity, I think, that feels really familiar. There is also a tenderness, I think, amongst folks that feels more familiar this year than last. Like a tenderness to be able to be with one another, I think feels really familiar than it did as a student. And it's hard too, right? Because I think one of my hesitations with wanting to with applying for this job and potentially returning was the danger of nostalgia, right? Like how much of my experience in this position is going to be colored and coded by what I experienced as a student, and I think that's unavoidable, right? So there has to be a bit of a balance, but the familiarity of there is an emerging tenderness that I was talking about this earlier. Like I was a little concerned we wouldn't be able to get, but it's showing up in just really lovely ways, and I think this year too, especially coming into this as a second year, there's tenderness and a willingness to be. To be. And that leaves room for folks. We can ask 10 folks in that question, and everybody will have a particular answer of what to be looks like, but it all sits under that same container.
Yeah.
And that's really, it's been lovely, I think, to see that happen in its own way for this particular community.
Yeah.
That's not mine.
Yeah.
That's been awesome. Yeah.
What do you think changed in the heart space to allow for that tenderness to grow and foster?
Ooh, yeah. Okay. I've been thinking on this question. All right, so this is gonna come off half baked.
Take your time, unpack, figure it out.
I think there is just like probably for the majority of our lives, of our lifetimes, we will be unpacking the last 2.5, 3 years, however we define the end of this particular, of this pandemic, of this moment, right? Like, however we...
The harsher bits of the lockdown.
Right, the harsher bits of that. And I remember early on, I don't know if you saw this messaging, but there was a poem or something going around that like, when this is over, I'm gonna hug a little tighter, love a little longer. All these things of time, right? And understanding like we are going to spend more time doing these things that maybe seem mundane or that we've taken for granted, and we're gonna spend a little more time doing that. My sense is that I think folks are taking their time and there are deadlines, right, and there are expectations. But my hope is that, and what I've noticed, whether folks are aware of it or not, is that they are taking their time and being intentional about, or as intentional as they can be, of what and where to use the energy that they have, and to put it in things that matter, and to put it in things that they care about, and people in communities that they care about. The flip side of that is that, right, like, sometimes that leads to folks siloing themselves off in their already particular communities. But, right, I think because we've all experienced this thing.
We all have.
Right, and
not just the students.
Not just the students, right? Like, we have all experienced these things in, yes, varying degrees and unequal degrees, but we have all experienced these things, and some of us are continuing to experience these things. And so being at a place, in a particular place, where the question is, how do I meet folks where they're at, as part of, and how do I bring my own particularities into this, and I'm calling it a vocation to do that, right? Like, being in a place where folks have at least that same alignment or desire, what other option is there than to be tender with one another, than to create space for folks to just be? I don't know. You can be in isolation, but I think we all know that nobody is an island. So maybe we're just learning to do that a little bit more with one another, to take our time and slow down and be, grieve. All those things, I think, are part of that half-baked.
Yeah. Not just a delicious Ben & Jerry's flavor anymore,
Ooh,
but a way of life.
Yes, absolutely. It is half-baked is probably a top tier Ben & Jerry's flavor, but two, I think we've also given ourselves permission to say that things are half-baked, and say that is an okay thing.
I remember when we would have, we would have like teaching sections for like biblical studies or theology. The most awful thing you could say was not something that was entirely wrong, but you could start a comment and give the preface, I think this is half-baked.
Yeah, this is a half-baked thought. And then it's like, the irony of that too is just like, and I'm outing myself in this because I literally just did that, but it's like, half-baked thoughts are often truthful, and they're vulnerable, right? And you are admitting that, like, you might not have all of the answers. You're admitting that, like, oh, I don't actually know how this is going to land, so in this particular space, I'm going to take a risk with folks and do so with the hopes that it is affirmed, or at least, like, gently pushed and prodded back against. But yeah, half-baked thoughts. I mean, we say they're half-baked, right? That's also they're in the process. They're becoming. I don't know. I think that's just beautiful. I think it's a lovely way that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and truthful with folks in ways maybe we're not used to.
And also, if you bake a brownie too much, it'll be crusty, and then it won't be a brownie, it will be cake.
Exactly. Who doesn't like an ultra chewy brownie? Well, there probably folks are, but
Yeah.
Like,
awful people. People who wear socks with sandals.
Whoa! Ooh, okay, would you apply that to slides?
People who preach in Crocs.
Oh, yeah. This is a hot take. I just don't fully understand the reemergence of Crocs. I get that they're comfortable, but I just like it is a hot take, and I'll catch some flack for it. I willingly do so. I just don't think they're that and slides. Like I don't know how slides and socks came back into the zeitgeist. I just don't get it.
Well, I mean, it's like, come on. You're not on the beach, working at a restaurant,
Exactly.
or in a hospital.
Right.
So why do you need to wear something like that when you could just wear another shoe that's perfectly as comfortable and shows off a lot less of your disgusting man toes?
Exactly. Like, what was it? Why are the dogs out, folks? Why are the dogs out? Like, put them away. But I just, I feel very strongly about the Crocs Renaissance 2.0 that we're in. I just I don't get it. I respect it. I will not yuck your yum, but I will not get a pair. Nope. I will stick by that for as long as I can, and we'll let this be the record. This is the case.
I want to pivot a little bit.
Please.
One of the things as I was doing my research for the interview is that I believe you got an ordination by the Universal Life Church.
I did.
At some point.
I did.
I would love to hear the story.
Oh, yes. In 2016, I was working for a Franciscan parish in New Jersey, and in my office, I think I was just like, this is how you know questions of ordination have always just like been on my mind, and I was like, what would happen if I did this? Like, what real consequence would happen if I just like signed myself up? And I saw that like Stephen Colbert had done it. And I was like, Stephen Colbert is like a lay faithful Catholic person. He's done it. That's my reference point. Great. So then I just did it. And it has actually been, I have like officiated 2 weddings and my uncle's renewal of vows, and it has actually been like such a life-giving thing for somebody who does not see themselves getting ordained in the Catholic Church. It's been such a lovely thing to be able to be a part of something sacred for folks, and for folks to be able to trust me with that part of their lives, and saying like, yeah, I will happily be the conduit that says your union, your marriage is it, and I jokingly had reached out to an old friend who's getting married in this coming year, and I was like, oh my gosh, congrats on your engagement. It would be if you ever need officiant, just hit me up. And she was like, yeah, actually, totally. And I was like, are you sure? She's like, yeah. So again, I think just being part of sacred moments on my own terms has been really beautiful. And I remember telling my boss after the fact that I had done it, and she was just like, why? And I was like, oh shoot, maybe I shouldn't publicize this to folks in the church right now. But then I was like, I'm a lay person. What's the worst that can happen to, like, and especially now, I'm like, I'm a lay person who got his MDiv at an ecumenical institution. Like, if for whatever reason I got excommunicated, for whatever reason that happens, like, okay, so I have there's a much larger body that I am a part of, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't mean to move us into solemn territory.
Please.
For what's been such an incredibly light, fun component, but I think that you're absolutely right. Like, the point being that the work of the spiritual, we can probably narrow that even more to say the Christian form of the spiritual is a lot bigger and a lot broader than we are oftentimes told that it actually is.
Easily, and I just, like, I think in 2020 I was applying for an associate street minister position with a church in Boston who will go unnamed. And
Catholic workery type stuff, or
I kind of, although I think they were actually an Episcopal church. I think. And so I had made it through all of these interviews, right? And I think it was like in the second or third round, and I told them, you know, I was not ordained. I am a Catholic person, so I wouldn't be able to serve in that capacity. And I think that's actually what the sticking point was. And I remember just, I think, feeling really dejected because it was a reminder of, though I think that the spiritual and the Christian church is much larger than any particular denomination, that the spaces that I want to occupy are still very, I think, like, the spaces that are the communities that I want to be a part of are still beholden to a more stratified understanding of that. You know, and I think that sort of tension has kind of followed me the majority of my professional life so far. And, you know, I've only been really, like, this feels like a new season of my professional life, but it has always felt like this tension of, how do I put this? A cosmic cube, right? The sense of, like, there's something much larger than it contains, but we are really trying so hard to put it in a box, and because of that, it becomes really dangerous to hold, right? Yeah, where was I going with this? My point is, I think, being here in this job and in this particular position, and even going to school here, I would tell folks that I am the minister that I am because of the people I was surrounded by and the people whom I've learned to do that from, and we do not come from the same tradition, but the Spirit, we all rest in the same Spirit. And again, we allow ourselves to be half-baked with one another in that. So that said, like, that this being here feels like a very special place to be able to do that and to create that possibility and to know that, yeah, we can step outside and the sea is okay. And if you need a floaty, I got you.
That leads kind of perfectly into the next line of inquiry. I can't imagine that this work is very easy because, at least in my experience, not to say that this is yours, although I suspect that it could be, being effectively the associate rector can often be a very can have a lot of responsibility without a level of agency that certainly a head pastor might have.
Yeah.
I imagine that's difficult. The pressure of doing something like that under ever-shifting lockdown conditions and safety guidelines means another layer of complexity.
Yes.
So I would really love to know what sorts of things you do to keep the wellspring full.
Ooh.
And to keep the spirit buoyed, like when things get like really, really hard.
Gosh, that feels like a very live question.
Yeah.
I think, especially because for me, these 2 years feel like very different experiences.
Yeah.
So far.
And more like 20 years rather than 2.
And more like 20 than 2. Yeah, exactly. I think for me, last year and the year before, even if it was at a different institution, was about survival, right? And so what are the things that I would do to survive? What things would I do to kind of just keep myself afloat? And that was, like, maybe having Haven hot chicken or allowing myself to asleep a little bit more, but the tending to myself was not actually to replenish a wellspring more than it was to fill the HP bar about a quarter of the way through, and then just keep going, right? Because you just had to be on your toes, and you not only did I have to be on my toes, or like our staff had to be on our toes, we also had to convince folks that like let's be on our toes together constantly, right? Like we had started from 80 persons in the chapel to 100. Then when Omicron came, we had 10 that we were live streaming back to 80, and then 165, and now we are here now, right? We couldn't start singing in the chapel until March of this past year, right? So having to convince people to be on their toes as much as we had to be on their toes, right? Like it was hard to find means of replenishment that didn't come until after the school year ended. So for me, that was like taking a vacation and visiting three of my closest friends from Div School.
Yeah.
Nate, Lee, Joshua Garcia, and Geronimo de Sumala were some of the folks I just got to see. And for me, it was like, oh, okay, I actually needed to, my replenishment looks like returning to folks who knew me outside of this place, right? Outside of this role that I am in. Nowadays, I now have a dog that I got midway through this past year. And also, again, I think it is about, I had this moment while I was walking my dog earlier. It was like, how I take care of my dog is maybe more, is a pretty good indicator of how I'm choosing to take care of myself.
Ooh.
Right? Like how I make sure that she is fed, that she is walking and has enough energy, that she is like feeling comfortable. Like all of those things I think are good indicators of how I treat myself. And so I think for me it's been about, replenishing the well springs have been maybe taking an earlier day and going to work out. Because I'm like, if my dog did it and I'm making time for her to do that, then I think I owe myself the same kind of moments to be able to take care of myself. It has been like being intentional of maintaining relationships with people who have known me for 15, 20 years and talking about things that are just not work related.
Yeah.
2 of my best friends have moved in together and they've been dating for a few years. Yeah, and that's actually been, for me, it's been such a beautiful reminder of how important big moments in life are. And when I see when I see them, like, oh my gosh, like we are making this decision to spend every day together, share our lives together, share a routine together. For me, I'm like, yeah, that's what it's about. And it's like, so it's a good reminder for me to remember that, and seeing it especially with like dear ones that I care about, that this is that Mumford and Sons lyric, where you invest in your love, you invest your life, right? So I'm learning to find ways of doing that. I don't think anything practical outside of going to the gym, making sure I get a CPAP, using my CPAP machine so I sleep a little better, but where do I want to put my love? Because it's where I'll put my life. So I think that's a question I'm sitting on in terms of replenishment these days. Yeah.
Do you, given this is a question, I suspect there are a lot of listeners who are listening to their colleagues in the field. Like we've had a couple comedians on, so we have a lot of comedians listen.
Okay.
We've had more than a few spirituality and faith practitioners on, so I suspect we have an increasing number of those, and same thing like college professionals as well. I wonder, do you get the same sort of spiritual replenishment from your practice of Catholicism now that your work is in liturgical and theological formation of others?
Ooh, yeah, that is a great question. Once you know how, this is going to be a crude metaphor, once you know how a sausage is made,
yeah,
it is really hard to turn that off. When you're in a butcher shop, right? Or like when you're in a deli. And so I think for me, the challenge has been allowing myself the space to yield and allowing myself to not feel the need to nitpick or to, criticize or to question, is really to allow myself to just be present. And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's
I would
really
think so.
That's really hard to do, and I think especially, it's hard to do, I think, in the particular Catholic spaces that I occupy.
Sure. Sure.
Because there are not many of them. More of the spaces that I occupy tend to be congregational, Episcopal, right? More times than they are Catholic. And I don't know if that is a regional thing. I don't know if that is more just like a Catholic thing. But it is a challenge, I think, in this particular moment to be able to turn off. Largely also, right, like New Haven, so much of it is taken up by the university, right? And the most available spaces within my vicinity that resonate with the things that I hold true are also largely occupied by members of the university, students, faculty, staff, right? So then how do I then find a way to cleave those differences out is really hard. It's really challenging. And so in a weird way, having to go outside of Catholic spaces feels like a better way to be able to yield. And obviously there are some difficulties with that too, but they don't feel, I think, as present in it doesn't feel as present as it does in the Catholic spaces that I frequent here.
Yeah. I don't know that I actually have another question right now. I'm just sort of letting that fall over me, because that's one of those things that for me is always the difficult thing too, across all the disciplines that I've worked. It's
sure.
Like, how do you? I was always jealous of our colleagues that would say, like, the more I learn about how the sausage is made, the more I love eating the sausage.
Whoa.
Right?
I mean, I just I don't know if I feel the same way, and I think part of it too is that the Catholic Church is so mired in scandal and dissension, and again, I think the church is at this really big inflection point about what the church is going to be or what it wants to be. And so that plays out in the life of its parishes, whether they like it to or not, whether they're willing to admit it to or not. And I guess it also feels like a different question, right? Because the sausage that I'm talking about might not actually be what they're talking about.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What I'm talking about actually is broader than this current iteration of the Catholic Church. And
say more about the sausage.
Well, I mean, it's just right, again, right, just this unordained Catholic person
Yeah.
who is quote unquote associate rector of this particular community, associate rector, right, like minister of this particular community. That sort of um, ecclesial imagination is far beyond, if not opposite, of the kind of liturgical imagination that exists in Catholic worship.
Sure.
Right? And so what that looks like and what folks are getting out of that is very different than the spaces that I am currently in.
Yeah.
Of like, okay, no, we are actually going to put way more focus on the Eucharist. Great, amazing. And then really, like, in a sometimes clearer way than none, it's about the word that's delivered by the preacher.
Yeah.
And so, for me, those are the things, or the whatever the centerpiece is of that liturgy.
Yeah.
That is more malleable than perhaps something as concrete as perhaps like a Catholic liturgy.
Yeah.
And the way that that plays out in the life of its believers and its members.
Yeah.
So those two things just don't make sense. You know, it doesn't make sense to my Catholic colleagues. It sometimes is harder to explain to friends and family members about what this is and why it's important. What matters is that the sausage just gets made. So it's a challenge, and sometimes it's just like, I think I'm done with it. I think I just want to step back. But once you see it, right, like, you can't unsee it unless you deliberately choose to. And if you do that for long enough, what then? That just seems like a really hard and taxing place to constantly reassert and occupy. Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It is, and it is a lot of work, I think, that sits in one being. And I think it's, but I also, again, right, like, I want to be wary of, are those things that are happening in real time? Are they also things that I am projecting onto myself are happening? Because I think it is so deeply tied with my sense of vocation and my own discernment about my place in the lowercase c church. Right? So I think it's taxing partially because I make it so. and I think because there's also like this real question of, do I stay or do I go?
Yeah.
Right, and it's not a binary question or a binary answer either. But yeah, I recognize that, like, my answer to that is very much ingrained with my own sense of place within this particular faith community. You know.
But at the same time, I mean, we're all people who have a sense of place. The
Sure.
the people who wrote the documents that our faith is based on had a sense of place.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, they did. I think if that's the case, what's the place now? Right, like, what kind of place or space are we creating now? We are becoming very clear about who we don't want to be a part of that space. So the question I would ask is, who then? and what? Yeah.
Let's pivot a little bit more.
Please.
I'm excited for you to be moving into a season of your ministry here at YDS that will be decreasingly impacted by COVID. I hope. Who knows?
Yeah, me too. It's weird though, because I feel like there, in some ways, because of the way that restrictions placed very clear boundaries of what was possible, it did this weird thing of having to actually, of what was impossible, and to do this weird thing of like, all right, what is actually possible that we can do? Right, and so when I was working at a high school in 2020 to 2021, we were trying to hold an Ash Wednesday service, and at the time, students were being in cohorts, and so you could only have folks come in certain times of the day. But we said no, we are going to make this happen, and we held a concurrent Ash Wednesday service in 3 different places and synced it so that folks were never crossing paths with one another, but we're all receiving ashes all at the same time, all at once, in a way that like still was within these very strict restrictions.
Wow.
It was nuts, right? And so last year, what we did for the Advent service, because of the rise of Omicron and what we could and couldn't do, we had everybody who was leading in the service be in the chapel, and everybody else who was watching in the old refectory.
Yes.
You know,
yes,
and
yes.
we had like made sure that that as much as possible the 2 spaces were congruent with each other. The lighting was there. The way that we decorated the spaces were similar, so that in some ways, even if folks couldn't be in the space together, we were able to at least acknowledge that this was a thing that we were doing together. And so for me, when I think about how what happens next, I'm excited to think more about possibility, and it's also been a real practice for me to be better about crafting prayers and texts that that can speak to folks in a particular way. And I don't know, maybe what we can do. We had somebody from Alvin Ailey came by. Freddie Moore came by a few weeks ago, and Willie Jennings read a little, and he said, and Freddie will dance afterwards, and he'll do a little bit more, and there's just beautiful synchronicity of things that were happening, and we can do those things now because we're not as limited to restrictions. But there was also, again, right, there was also certain grace of being able to see like just how creative can one be within a certain set of boundaries. So we'll see what happens. I think there's also a part of me that just thrives under chaos and pressure, and that might be worth interrogating.
It's kind of like Marquand Chapel became like a reality show where there are these increasingly ridiculous tent stakes that got put down that you had to pivot around, like cook a 4-course dinner in the snow.
Totally. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, when we had 10 people in the chapel, it was like only the participants, the preacher, and then we were switching between like worship aids that were being screen shared, and also somebody monitoring all the people who were coming into the chat while watching the live stream in the chapel and making sure that was happening. I was like, oh, I didn't realize I became an associate producer in the course of 3 weeks. But like all right, and then like 2 weeks later, it's like actually we're back in the chapel and we could sing again and we could be with one another, and I was just like, what is happening?
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun to like, it's fun for me. There's like, I do find a certain joy in being able to juggle, because it also for me is like it forces me to really think about how do I get folks invested in this?
Yeah.
And wanted to come along for the journey. And that I think if we can do that, we can do some really transformative stuff. But at the core of it, we need to know, how are we bringing people along? What are the things that we care about? Where we bring people along as to why this matters. Why does having a daily worship matter? Why does it matter that we block this time off in the entire day for nobody to do anything? And obviously it's not mandatory, but for a chance to do that. Why do we want to do this? Why is this important? Why is this integral to who we are as an institution? Okay, so then how do we get folks on board with that?
Yeah.
Right?
I've got a little bit of a speed round for you, and
Sure.
and either or a sort of what would you prefer?
Okay.
And this mostly has to do with the transition from student to staff person.
Okay.
Would you rather? And I don't know if this was your thing, but there was the graduate bar in the before times. There was Gypsy.
Oh, I was a bartender there.
That's right, you were. Oh my God, you even asked me if I wanted a job one semester. No, would you rather spend your evenings bartending at Gypsy, or at home now with your feet up because you have to go?
Oh, okay. So it's actually called Griffin's Pub now.
Thank you.
No problem. And oh gosh, this has been such a live question all the time. I think today I will kick my feet up and play God of War, then go to and go to the bar. Yeah, I think I've actually become a little bit more of a homebody, so probably will choose the latter unless there is some convincing reason for me to be at Griffin's past 9 o'clock. If not, then yeah, I would probably choose if I have a good drink, kick my feet up, play some God of War, Call of Duty with my besties, or like just be in good company. Yeah, I think I'd rather do that than be at Griffin's.
Would you rather run a liturgy meeting with your chapel team, or be in Intro to Christian liturgy with whatever the liturgical studies class, like
like Foundations of Christian Worship.
That's what it's called, Foundations of Christian Worship. Would you rather be in a lecture of Foundations of Christian Worship, or be running a meeting with your chapel team?
Oh, running a meeting with my chapel team. I love working with students, and so I love doing that, and so any opportunity to do that, I'm in.
Would you rather be without a safety net on the first chapel back for the fall semester, or the Advent service?
Oh my God. Without a safety net. Ironically, I had to preach the first day of classes this year, so this is like this. You're asking very pointed questions, and it's giving me very big Sean Evans vibes. Without a safety.
Come be on the podcast, Sean Evans.
That'd be amazing. Okay, first day of classes or Advent service without a safety net. Advent service.
Yeah? Why Advent service?
I think it's because it is one of the it is the only time where we really intentionally bring the community together that's not classroom related. That's not academic related. We say, we are coming here to celebrate this new season and being together, and obviously there is a gathering that happens after the fact, but no, I think right, like this is the only time where we are actually intentionally inviting folks to come together as a community that's not tied to anything but being together. And so being able to do that with no safety net could be fun, and it could be really beautiful, so I'll do that one. I need to. I'm chuckling a little bit because I'm like, it's on record now. It's on record.
I hope the last two will be a little bit easier. Whiskey or gin?
Whiskey.
Okay, very good. And beer or cider?
Beer.
There you go. Very good. I should have eased you in with those because, like, I feel like on the Sean Evans show they get harder as the farther you go along. Anyway, we've just got one last question to wrap up our time.
Yes.
I'm so grateful that you've spent the time that you've been with us.
Thank you for having me.
But this is the same question that we ask everybody as we close out our time together.
Okay.
And this is, what do you want the world to look like when you're done with it?
I feel like, I remember I heard this at the end of your trailers. I was like, I should prepare for this, but I can't. Like, okay, what do I
You're
want?
the first guest that knew that this was coming.
I know. I was just like, because I was like, this is such an interesting. What do I want the world to look like when I'm gone or when I'm done with it? I think I'm gonna sit on it for a hot second.
Take a minute. Take your time. Take 2 half seconds even.
I hope that when I'm done with it, when I'm out, that we're just a little bit closer to being done with it. That we're just like a little bit closer to not have to ask the question, to walk through the door and just sit. I hope that that we learn to continue being like tender with each other, to remember that like a half-baked cookie is still a cookie. And to give each other the grace to not chase perfection, but goodness. And to just like say like, yeah, that'll do. I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, no, that'll do. Yeah. I think that's my hope. Yeah. If we can get folks closer, great.
Well said. Thank you so, Mikey. Thank you so much for
you,
the time
Polly.
that you spent with us and the chat. So grateful and so glad to get to see you.
Oh, you too, Polly. Thank you so much.